I introduced myself as Martin. By the time things finally came to an end, I had already reached the point where I was on the verge of quitting my marriage and was considering doing so. During a period of time, I had been living in a marriage that seemed more like a gradual decline than a life that we enjoyed together. On the other hand, I was aware that it was time for me to go during the family barbecue, where I was ridiculed. That evening, once everyone had departed and the home was silent, I vanished without a trace. Julie, my wife, and I had been married for a little more than 8 years at the time. At first, we were similar to most couples in that we were deeply linked to one another. We were making preparations. It wasn't enough for us to simply have a house. We wanted a home. In order to fulfill our desire, we joined up for it. Moreover, we pursued it together for a period of time. Things began to change, however, somewhere around the 5th year of schooling. The fact that it did not occur suddenly is what made it more difficult to notice. This was the moment that we made the decision to start trying for children. As a couple, we had a strong desire for them. We sought the assistance of reproductive clinics when the months turned into years without any positive results. The schedules, injections, and tests, as well as the appointments. Every single item that they suggested we attempt, we did. There was a fresh optimism for each month. As each month came to a close, there was a resounding sense of dissatisfaction that permeated the space like smoke. I seen the effects that it had on Julie. Her behavior grew more subdued and reserved. In the beginning, I believed that it was just stress. It was painful for both of us. On the other hand, she eventually gave up trying completely at some point in time. Furthermore, not just with the treatments, but also with me. She ended her pursuit of the dream. I believe that she finally let go of it fully when it got too painful for her to continue to cling on to it. Furthermore, it seemed as though she had also abandoned our marriage at that moment. Once upon a time, affection was quite easy to get by. Moreover, in its stead came this icy and courteous manner of remoteness. The house we lived in, the bed we slept in, and the table we ate at were all the same during our time together. I had the impression that I was living with a complete stranger. And with each passing day, the void that existed between us became increasingly profound. The fact that she didn't appear to notice or care was the thing that stung the most. It was as if she had emotionally shut down. Despite the fact that the other person was letting go, I reminded myself that love required remaining steadfast. It was perhaps 1 year and a few months prior to the point that everything started to go apart between Julie and I that her sister came up at our home. A horrible breakup with her spouse had just occurred, and she had just left him. In this context, I am referring to full-blown yelling confrontations, charges of cheating, and even the police being called to their house on multiple occasions. The situation was a mess, and it was no surprise that she required a vacation. Julie approached me and inquired about the possibility of her sister staying with us for a few days, simply until she was able to sort out what was going on. The answer is yes, of course. Simply put, it was the right thing to do. On top of that, she had 2 young children who had not asked for any of this. So, they arrived with a few bags and what appeared to be a plan for the duration of the night. On the other hand, a few days quickly began to stretch out. I reasoned that she might require a few more days prior to making a decision about what she would do next. However, those days eventually turned into a number of weeks. There was no mention of her obtaining a job, acquiring a place of her own, or even returning to the area that she had previously settled in. The contents of her belongings began to take up our guest room. At times, the toys of the children could be found in our bedroom as well as in the living room and the kitchen. The washing that we did was contaminated with their garments. However, I did not speak up. Over the course of a few weeks, however, it stretched into a month. Then there are 2. And then, before I knew it, we were well into the 3rd month, and she was still living in the house she had been living in. The fact that I had a complete other family living under my roof was something that no one appeared to find problematic, with the exception of me. My wife's sister was a noisy and snarky person who always had something slick to say. The children were a complete and utter mayhem every single moment. No sense of control, no regard for space, and no discipline were present in the situation. Having to live in a daycare that was run by a drunk circus clown was like another world. There was a great deal of strain in each and every day. When I got home from work, I would be fatigued and with the hope of finding some calm, but instead I would be confronted with a new chaos. After a while, disagreements turned into the norm. There was no longer any conversation. Instead, there was only confrontation. What caused the most pain, then? It was usually Julie who stood at her sister's side. At all times, Julie was determined to defend her sister in any situation, regardless of how poorly her sister behaved. My worries would be voiced in a calm manner, but she would dismiss them. Explanations such as, "She is my only sister," and "You can't expect me to throw her out just because they did one thing you don't like," were among the explanations that she offered. My wife, Julie, did not acknowledge the validity of my frustration. The memory of this one particular instance has stayed with me. Her sister was making fun of me and making snide remarks about me. Julie chimed in with a smirk and remarked, "Oh, stop, he's sensitive." This was in contrast to the alternative of shutting it down. They both laughed at that point. This made me feel ashamed. To the point where I wasn't even sleeping in my own bed. It got to that stage as well. As a result of Julie's decision to allow her sister and the children to sleep in our bedroom, I was responsible for finding space wherever I could. At this point, I am aware that some individuals could hear all of this and wonder, why didn't you just leave? And believe me, I question myself about that as well. However, it was not as easy as that. It was my belief that a significant portion of what Julie was going through was the anguish that resulted from the fact that we were unable to have children. It was a crushing blow to her. I was under the impression that if we were able to overcome that and figure out a way to go on together, then the love that we had in the past might return. In the mistaken belief that our marriage still had a shot, I stayed for a longer period of time than I should have. Nevertheless, I was beginning to become aware that I was beginning to feel exhausted. Love was no longer sufficient to keep me planted in a place where I felt like a stranger. One day, I had reached that point where love alone was no longer sufficient. So I made arrangements for a private meeting with a divorce attorney, and I shared the details with the attorney. As a result of that meeting, the divorce papers were drafted and prepared some weeks later. However, I was unable to muster the courage to serve them. It wasn't because I believed she would change. Rather, it was because a portion of me still desired for her to look at me in the same way that she had in the past, even if it was just for a moment. Despite this, the stress did not decrease while I was waiting. I created a mental list of things that needed to be done and began crossing them off one at a time. My first order of business was to discreetly pack some of my most important belongings, including clothes, documents, and sentimental items, and then to store them in old moving packaging. In the event that anyone discovered them, I used a hazy label to describe them. The following step was for me to rent a tiny storage facility outside of town and pay for it in cash. The kind of location that no one would ever consider looking at was this one. I started moving the boxes there in a slow and methodical manner, a couple at a time. An entirely new bank account with a different name variation was started by me. I recently purchased a new mobile device. In addition to that, I chose a new city. Somewhere more intimate and less noisy. It was all planned out to the minute, right down to the hour. I was prepared to turn into a ghost in the event that my marriage were to come to an end. Nevertheless, I did not pull the trigger. To put it simply, I continued to adore her in spite of everything. Even though I was in a lot of pain and exhausted, I was still clinging to the woman I had married. I was holding on to her somewhere deep within me. I went out for a few hours with the intention of clearing my head on a Saturday. Following my return to my driveway, I noticed that there were a greater number of vehicles than usual lined the roadway. Laughter could be heard coming from the backyard. Even before I opened the front door, I could hear children yelling and running around the inside of the house. After entering, I followed the sounds all the way inside. There was life in the backyard. As they ran around, children were carrying juice cartons in their hands. Burgers were being flipped at the grill by an individual. There was a steady yet low level of music. In addition, it appeared as though everyone was either deeply engaged in conversation or making jokes. On the patio table, there were drinks, and there were paper plates stacked high with food. The entire 9 yards was covered in food. There was a full-fledged family barbecue being held. Is it the only issue? I had absolutely no idea what I was talking about. At the entrance, I paused for a moment, just taking everything in for a moment. It was like walking into a party that was being hosted by someone else in your own home. I maintained an expression of neutrality. My wife, Julie, was seen laughing with her parents close to the patio table. I was able to see them. Another one of Julie's aunts saw me and motioned for me to come over before I could even finish my sentence. "Martin, please come and get this for me as soon as possible," she called. As I made my way across the yard, I gave a slight nod. In my entire life, I have never had any problems with my extended family. If I'm being completely honest, I've always had a better relationship with some of them than I have with Julie herself these days. I then feigned a grin and went to offer assistance. While I was handing over the tray that she required, another relative approached me with a questioning look and inquired, "Hey, where have you been all day?" "We have been here for a considerable amount of time. Do you not know that we are about to arrive?" That was the moment when things finally clicked. I was not included. When my sister-in-law pierced through the discussion with a voice that was loud enough, she said, "You know, if Martin disappeared tomorrow, I don't think anyone would even notice." I barely opened my lips to answer to her statement. Everyone erupted in fits of laughter. "To put the cherry on top of the cake," her sister said, "I had no idea that you were not present." Indeed, the intention was for it to be a joke. However, not to me. As a result, I raised my hot dog as if it were a bottle of wine, smiled half-heartedly, and said, "I accept the challenge." There was no further comment made after that. A few individuals gave me a quick glance, most likely believing that I was also joking. However, I was not. At that same instant, I went ahead and made the choice. I was sick and tired of being out of sight in my own life. There was a faint buzzing sound coming from the house even after the barbecue had finally subsided and the most of the visitors had taken their leave. And this was the evening. Leaving the marriage was already something I was considering doing. As a result of what was said to me today, I decided that I would not wait for things to become much more difficult. It wasn't essential for me. In a duffel bag, I have only the essentials, which include a few of clothing, my laptop, several crucial documents, and some cash. I left a copy of the divorce paperwork that had been signed right in the middle of the kitchen counter, where she would have to see it in the morning. I also placed a yellow sticky note on top of the document in a nice manner. I left this before I left the house. "Have you noticed it yet?" it asked. Following that, I exited the building, secured the door behind me, climbed into my vehicle, and drove away. On the same evening, I erased all of the social media accounts that were associated with my name. Use Instagram. Use Facebook. On LinkedIn. It's gone. Afterwards, I retrieved my previous prepaid phone, replaced the SIM card, and discarded the original phone by throwing it into a storm drain at a gas station located 2 towns away. Nobody, not even she, wanted to find me. I didn't want to be discovered. I simply could not continue to cause harm to myself by remaining. I traveled to a modest cabin that I had seen before and that was advertised on a classified website that was not very popular. The owner of the property was a retired man who did not engage in a lot of questioning. I made a cash payment in advance for 3 months. The location was far enough away from civilization that it gave the impression that the world had forgotten about it, yet it was also close enough to a town that I could easily get groceries whenever I wanted them. I was able to make a living by performing several online freelancing projects. It earned just enough to pay the handful of fundamental requirements that I permitted myself to have, such as food and power. The days seemed to blend into one another. No timetable was in place, and there was no pressure. It was the sound of birds that would wake me awake. After a few weeks, months passed. The length of my beard increased. I started eating healthier, getting more rest, and finding it easier to think clearly. I finally came to the conclusion that I did not have to check on Julie, thus I did not do so at any point. That particular chapter has come to a conclusion, and revisiting a wound in order to determine whether or not it is still bleeding is never beneficial. Considering that it has been 8 months since I left, I decided to check one of my old email accounts in order to look for a personal file that I had backed up many years ago. The one I had not signed into since before I left was the one in question. I was not anticipating anything at all. I became completely still the instant I opened my inbox. The emails were all from Julie, and there were many of them. When I first opened my eyes, I was at a loss for words. To a certain extent, I did not want to examine them. A number of times, I moved my mouse cursor over the delete button. Nevertheless, I ultimately got it. In the beginning, they were really angry. It was imperative that she find out where I had gone. She referred to me as a callous, cowardly, and selfish person. I told her that I was leaving her behind and that I had no right to simply disappear. She swore that she would track me out and present me in court. Her utterances were incisive. The tone of the emails, however, shifted as I progressed through them in chronological order. Her sentences began to become more gentle. In spite of the fact that there were still questions, they were no longer loaded with anger. They exhibited a sense of uncertainty and reluctance, as if she was starting to recognize her own voice in the void that I had left behind. Those that were most recent struck me in a different way. I can still vividly recall glancing at one in particular. She mentioned that the bank had begun sending warnings, which were supposed to be about missed payments, indicating that foreclosure might be on the horizon. Trying to maintain the financial stability of the household, she stated that she was now working 2 jobs. Stated that she was compelled to send her sister and the children go. According to what she wrote, they were not assisting. It was as if she had finally understood what I had been attempting to express for months. "I get it now," she stated in one of her messages. "It makes sense to me why you were acting so aloof. But I really wish that I hadn't been so oblivious." One of them read, "I wish you would come home. Rather than because I require assistance, it is because I miss you. Mostly due to the fact that I fully comprehend what you choose to give up in order to keep things together." Following that, the one that knocked the wind out of me arrived. "I was a moron," she wrote in there. "You were taken for granted by me. In spite of the fact that I disregarded you quite a bit, I believed that you would always be there. Regarding the divorce papers, I have not yet signed them. I continue to hold out hope that one day you will come through the door." My eyes were fixed on the TV as I sat there. To tell you the truth, I did experience something. As I read those lines, I felt a pain in my chest. I was familiar with that aspect of her. Is the side that is capable of profound love. The side that desired to construct anything with me at one point in time. Moreover, it's possible that this was the version of her that eventually managed to cut through the din. However, feelings aren't often enough on their own. I resided in that residence for a number of years, trying to persuade myself that love will make things better. That period of time would be healing. However, at this point, even after reading those communications, which were filled with emotion, I was unsure whether or not I would ever be able to return to that life. When I reached this moment, it had been precisely 1 year since I had disappeared. For the first time in a very long time, I was able to breathe clean air and live off the grid for an entire year. I also severed all of my links. Only once every couple of weeks did I make a trip into town to get supplies. On that particular day, I made a visit to a quaint coffee shop that I had grown to enjoy. Located on the outskirts of the city, it was a secret spot. I entered the establishment, placed my order, and was waiting at the counter to be picked up when I heard someone call out my name out loud. At first, I chose to disregard it. On the other hand, the second time it arrived, it was more forceful and I turned around. And it was Ryan, a friend from our shared past. I believe that he had, in a sense, seen a ghost since his eyes widened as if he had just witnessed one. Small chat was awkwardly exchanged between us. I did not reveal too much information and kept it brief. After a little over a week had passed, there came a knock at the door of my cabin. I decided to peek under the curtain because I wasn't expecting anyone to be there. Here she was, Julie, waiting for us. In that little instant, I did not move. I cautiously opened the door while maintaining a neutral expression on my face. "Do you have any desires?" I inquired about it. Because she had just broken down and started crying, she did not speak. Again and again, she expressed her regret. She was unaware that things had deteriorated to such a degree. Said she wishes she had paid closer attention and understood the situation sooner. Not once did I interrupt. I allow her to talk. Following her completion of the task, I accompanied her to the exit, looked her in the eyes, and informed her that I would return, but only to conclude this matter in the appropriate manner. Whatever needs to be signed, I will sign. Let's draw a conclusion like we're adults. However, I am unable to again be your husband. When everything is considered. But not after everything that your sister has done to me. This is not after you sat by and allowed it to take place. She did not engage in a debate. She had no courage left to put up a fight. A slight nod is all that is required. She cleaned her face and attempted to grin, but she was unable to do so. As soon as she finished, she went. After giving everything some thought, it is peculiar that people don't start to recognize the importance of something or someone until after it has already been taken away from them. Those are some of the most challenging lessons that life may teach you. In addition, it is a lesson that I had to not only teach but also experience firsthand. For many years, I remained in a marriage that was obviously on the verge of disintegrating. However, what you won't hear is that love can't endure when one person is making an effort to be with the other while the other has emotionally disconnected themselves. Because I loved Julie, I was willing to put up with the continual disrespect, the belittling, and the chaos that came along with my sister-in-law and her children living with them. When I was at home, I forgot that I was there. Nevertheless, the most bizarre part is that she didn't start making sense of it until after I had disappeared. That was the moment when she understood what I had been attempting to convey the entire time. Perhaps that is exactly what some individuals require. The absence of something that they assumed would remain for all time. In the event that you are now experiencing a circumstance in which you feel as though your presence is being taken for granted, I hope that my narrative will provide you with some food for thought. To demonstrate that you are whole, you shouldn't wait until you're broken before you do so. Also, if you are someone who has been pushing someone away, you should ask yourself why it is that it is only after they have left that you are finally able to recognize their value. I would be very interested in hearing your thoughts on everything else. Post a comment below. If you have been through something similar, please share your own experience with me. If you haven't been through it, please tell me what you think about it. It would be greatly appreciated if you could share this tale with someone you know who might be in need of hearing something similar today. Who knows who might be sitting calmly with their bags already packed, just waiting for one more excuse to vanish. You never know. It is great to have you here.